Good evening. Thank you all for coming. The program will start in just a few minutes. We'll be starting promptly at 7 o'clock, so if you start taking your seats now. Thank you.
One of the most amazing moments of being a challenge director is when I directed my challenge B class. Just so happens that the District of Columbia Circuit Court opened a forum for parents to come and talk about the negatives and the benefits of homeschooling. And I said, hey, what do you think if we go down and participate in this Q&A, in this open hearing about homeschooling? I remember stepping into the building and it was kind of like an awesome moment, just understanding the ramifications of what the decision that they were about to make, not only for future homeschooling in the District of Columbia, but for the impact that it would have on our other 50 states. The district leaders didn't expect a great turnout. The auditorium was packed, and most of them were homeschooling parents. And so one of the questions that was posed to the audience by one of the representatives there was about socialization, right? Good old socialization of homeschool kids, right? They're not socialized very well. They don't interact with their peers. Basically we stick them in the closet, right? One of our students, Jonathan, raised his hand and the representative chose him. And it was a leading question. We talked in an item about leading questions. After all, we're practicing for mock trial, we're getting them ready for debating and all of those things, and we all just kind of held our breath, thinking, okay, did Jonathan remember what a leading question was? Because this was a big leading question. And I remember the moment, it was just so surreal. Jonathan stood up and he said, sir, well, if you're asking me that my parents keep me at home and I never get a chance to interact with children, I don't get to do things outside my home, that I don't get to explore things that I'm interested in, well, I have to say, sir, that you're wrong, and I would have to answer that question no. But if you're saying that homeschool children rarely ever have the benefit of participating in activities and doing things that normal school children would do, again, sir, I would have to say no. You could hear a pin drop in the auditorium. And the representative, he said, Jonathan, how old are you? And Jonathan said, I'm 13, sir. And he goes, well, in 6 years, I want you to come see me because I want to give you a job on my district court. And there was a resounding cheer in the auditorium that a homeschool student stood up to a representative and defended homeschooling and did a very good job. Well, as you know, the end of the story is that homeschool was revived in the District of Columbia. And the impact of winning that case in our nation's capital for the other 50 states was amazing. And it was a stepping stone for home educators. So I wanted to share that story with you because we had a chance to take our class to participate in the political process and to know what the freedoms and democracy that we enjoy as Americans, but most especially a moment for our students to stand up and defend something that they very strongly believed in.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Florida Citizens Alliance meeting this evening. You are in for a treat finding out. If you can call the outrageous things you're going to find out a treat. However, you are going to get so much information tonight and so many things that are going to open your eyes to the possibilities of what you can accomplish. I'm Randall Cutter. I'm the pastor of New Dawn Community Church. I saw this presentation, or at least parts of it, back in April in the event that was in Naples. I watched it on the stream, and so when I heard they needed a place, I was delighted to be able to say, yes, I would be pleased to provide a location in Broward County. So welcome. And I want to begin with a prayer today so that this whole thing is bathed and covered in the presence of the Lord. So, Lord Jesus, you are the head of the church. You are the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. You, in eternity past, saw us gathered together on this evening. And you knew the importance of the things that would be released. You knew that there would be people in this room who can make a difference. And you called them to be here tonight. You knew there were people on the stream who could make a difference. And you called them to be online tonight. We ask that you would send your Spirit and you would grace us with your presence tonight so that we are able to step into everything you planned thousands of years ago for this event. I pray that every one of the speakers would have their minds opened even further as they see new connections and new insights. I pray that as we leave here tonight, we say, not only do I know that there's bad stuff going on or good stuff going on, but I know how to make a difference. We ask for your presence so that all of these things might happen this evening. We pray in your name. Amen.
Thank you. My name is Keith Flaw. I know many of you, but I'm sure some of you don't know me. I'm one of the founders of Florida Citizens Alliance, and you'll meet Dominique here in just a few minutes. I'm going to lead us in the pledge, but I'm going to challenge you before we do that to say the pledge properly. Do you all know that there's no comma in one nation under God? So let's try to say it without the comma tonight, okay? Or do we have a flag? Oh. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Terrific. How many veterans do we have in the room? Any? Well, we have one. Okay. Well, I just wanted to recognize any that are here. How about first responders? Do we have any first responders in the room? Okay. Well, we go out of our way to thank them. So let me tell you, I want to welcome you to this event. We do a number of events around the state, and we're searching for the right way to do these kinds of events. As the pastor said, we did one over in Naples on the 17th at Naples Community Church. By the way, that happens to be the church for Senator Rick Scott, home church for him, so that was kind of interesting. And we are doing these events around the state to try to help folks understand what's really going on. We're an organization of 110,000 people strong and growing, and about 100 different groups across the state. I want to, you'll get an opportunity to learn a little bit more about us from Dominique, but I want to thank our sponsors for this event. We have John and Tawana Amon from Broward Right to Life. And we have a gentleman from, actually from Lakewood Ranch, south of Sarasota. His name is Vern Nelson. He's also a sponsor for this event tonight. And of course, a very special thank you to Pastor Randy and the church. So thank you. Okay, without any further ado, Dominique Clemens has I'm so proud of this lady. She was an intern for us. She went to Hillsdale College, and as a sophomore, between her freshman and sophomore year, she joined us as an intern for 3 years. And we were so delighted with what she did and what she was bringing to us that we offered her a full-time job back just right out a year ago. It's been a year. Time flies when we're having fun, right? And then just a couple weeks ago, the board voted unanimously to make her the director of operations for our entire organization. So Dominique.
Thank you so much. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. We have so much information to share with you. We've jam-packed it all between 7 and 9, and I promise you, you will be out of here by 9, so please stay until the very end because we just have so much we want to share with you, lots of materials that you can take home and actually make a difference here in Broward County. First, I would like to begin by introducing our first speaker. So Alex Newman is an award-winning international journalist, educator, author, and consultant who seeks to glorify God in everything he does. He has written for a wide array of publications in the United States and abroad. He currently serves as a foreign correspondent for the New American Magazine, is a contributor to the Epoch Times, a writer for WND, and an education writer for Freedom Project Media, a correspondent for the Law Enforcement Intelligence Brief, and much more. Alex wrote a series of articles that were published in the New American Magazine titled Rescuing Our Children, and he just recently started an organization called Public School Exit. Alex Newman digs deep to find the truth, no matter how unsettling it may be. Please give a warm welcome to Alex Newman.
Thank you so much, Dominique, and thank you everybody for being here. It's an honor and a pleasure. Actually, we're close to my hometown, Miami. And you said 9, I assume you mean 9 a.m.? No, we'll go quick. I do have a lot of stuff, so I'm going to talk at like warp speed, but then if you need to, you can go back and watch the video and maybe do it super slow motion. It'll make more sense. Yeah, I got to start off with some really terrible news. You know, my grandpa, his whole life, voted Republican every single election, like clockwork, Republican. And then 2020 comes along, and suddenly find out he's voted for Biden. I know, it's absolutely crazy. And you know, that never would have happened if he was still alive. But in all seriousness, even if we do ever restore election integrity in this country, it's going to be absolutely meaningless over the long term if we don't deal with the problem that I'm going to share with you today. They are brainwashing our children. You can see that board right there. That really proves the point. Okay, the blue, that's where they voted, the young people, my generation, or what is it, 18 through 25s. Okay, so you got the blue is Democrats, 504 electoral votes. The Republicans got 23. That's our future, folks, if we don't deal with this problem. Okay, got to wake this up. Here we go. So there is some really, really good news out there. The COVID, the enemy intended it for evil. They tried to shut down our businesses. They tried to destroy our lives, take all our freedoms, but incredible things happened. Homeschool population doubled. People are fleeing the government schools like never before. We have a massive exodus. Just incredible. Really, really good news. Here's the bad news. You know, the polling data, I showed you that board right there that the Florida Citizens Alliance brought. But this poll was commissioned by the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation. It's a scientific poll. And what they found is that 70% of millennials, that's my generation, are going to vote for socialists. Socialists, not just Democrats, socialists. In the future. Right now, most of them don't vote, thank goodness, but as the older generations die off and the millennials take over as the political leaders, the corporate leaders, America is going to look a lot more like Venezuela and Cuba than we'd like to admit if we don't take this seriously, guys. It's a big problem. On the religion front, you know, America has always been a Christian nation, overwhelmingly Christian nation. With each successive generation now for the last 50 years, that number has been steadily declining to the point now where millennials, again, my generation, for the first time in all of American history, Christians, self-described Christians, are now in the minority. Okay, you remember Obama said, whatever we once were, we were not a Christian nation anymore. Okay, he was right. Okay, and this all came about through the government school system. She mentioned the Rescuing Our Children special issue. We have a sequel coming out in just 2 weeks, and I've got a whole in-depth article, actually the longest article in there, about the war on Christianity that has been waged through the public school system. And the thing is, you know, people think this is an aberration, that we lost control of it somehow. This was the plan from the beginning, and I'm going to try to give you a very brief sneak preview. And we're at the point now, and people struggle to believe this, but it's a fact, where the State Board of Education in California voted unanimously just a few weeks ago for the ethnic studies model curriculum, where every elementary school child will be chanting to the pagan, Aztec, demonic deities of cannibalism and human sacrifice. They will be asking for critical consciousness and help with liberation. Okay, it's right out of the curriculum. The guy who wrote the curriculum, he goes by the name of, I grew up in Mexico, so I'm very familiar with all these Aztec deities. We used to go to the pyramids outside Tenochtitlan. tens of thousands of people sacrificed sometimes in one weekend. And the guy who wrote this curriculum that was adopted by the state board goes by the name of Cuauhtemoc. He said these Aztec deities should provide help in waging a counter-genocide against Christians in the Americas. So this is what our California children will be doing, and unfortunately it's a nationwide problem. Now, Adolf Hitler was wrong about everything. He was a socialist, a national socialist, but he was right about one thing, and this came up at the Nuremberg trials. He understood that if he wanted to keep the power forever, he wanted to build this crazy 1,000-year Reich, you guys remember, that the road to that ran right through the minds of the children. So his goal was to separate parents from children, to demonize parents, so all the kids had to go to the government brainwash camps posing as schools. In fact, he was the first leader in human history to make it a crime for parents to homeschool their children. Never happened before in all of history that parents weren't allowed to educate their own children. And then after school, they all had to go to the Hitler Youth. Okay, just to make sure they got that extra dose of brainwashing. And this is what he said. He said, he alone who owns the youth gains the future. And he was absolutely right. And now we are moving in that direction in America. So I'm going to show you a lot of clips. I like to bring the receipts so that nobody has to believe me. And so I'm going to show you a clip from MSLSD. They call it MSNBC. This is Melissa Harris Perry. Listen to what she says.
We have never invested as much in public education as we should have because we've always had kind of a private notion of children. Your kid is yours and totally your responsibility. We haven't had a very collective notion of these are our children. So part of it is we have to break through our kind of private idea that kids belong to their parents or kids belong to their families and recognize that kids belong to whole communities. Once it's everybody's responsibility and not just the households, then we start making better investments.
Collective kids, okay? Just like in Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. It worked out real well there, didn't it? Now, this is official policy. It was during the Obama administration. They put this out from the Department of Education and Health and Human Services. They said parents could be equal partners with the government in the raising of their own children. And then as you read the document, you see they don't even really mean equal partners. You get to be the junior partner as long as you do what you're told. If you don't, then we need some mandatory parenting lessons. And if you still won't, then maybe you don't get to have a family, okay? Here's Arnie Duncan. He spent 7 years as the Secretary of Education under Obama. Listen to what he says. Doesn't it remind you of Adolf Hitler?
And there's certain kids we should have 24/7 to really create a safe environment and give them a chance. I think all of our schools should be community centers. Our schools should be open 12, 13, 14 hours a day with a wide variety of after-school.
Yeah, let's call it the Obama youth. Okay, creepy stuff, right? Hillary Clinton's been on this bandwagon for decades. You remember we need a village to raise the children. Of course, if you read the book, it's a government village that will raise your children. And here is the fruit of the government village raising your children. Not too far from here. You guys remember these geniuses, right? A shooting at the school. And they said, I know. David Hogg went on CNN. Said, our parents don't know how to use an effing democracy. Just wait till we're in charge. We're going to take all the guns, and then there won't be any more shootings. Huh. That's interesting. In the 1930s, a 7-year-old could order a fully automatic machine gun from the Sears catalog, no questions asked, no ID. Guess how many school shootings we had? None. Very good. Right. So obviously the guns aren't the problem, right? Go back to Cain and Abel, right? There's all kinds of implements that you can use for murder. Guns are not the problem. But before we get into what they're doing in the schools to produce this kind of situation where our children are shooting each other, where they're injecting drugs into their veins, where they're murdering babies in the womb, we need to see that there really is a big picture agenda here. They have a goal, they have a plan, they've outlined it all, and rather than tell you about it myself, I'll let them speak for themselves. So here is former President of the United States. This was in 1991 on national television.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
So I could talk for an hour just about that one little clip, but listen to what he said, right? He's very confident they'll succeed. Of course, why wouldn't he be? They got 80% of our kids in their brainwash camps for 12 years at least, right? But listen to what he said. A world where the UN's peacekeeping forces, their peacekeeping role, that's the UN's military, will implement the vision of the UN's founders. Well, we know quite a bit about the UN's founders. Stalin sent Mr. Molotov. He's the guy that carved up Europe, him and Adolf Hitler. Said, okay, you get those guys, we get these guys, and we'll live happily ever after. Then on our side, we sent Alger Hiss. status from the State Department, and they really liked him. They made him actually the chairman of the conference that wrote the UN Charter. Then they made him the first Secretary General of the UN. And then we threw him in prison because we found out he was an agent of Joseph Stalin. So these are the founders of the UN. Why would you want to implement their vision when our founders had a perfectly great vision? God gave us rights. We create government to protect those rights. Leave us alone. Okay? That was a good vision. But that's where they're going. And it's not a Republican problem. Right? I'm not down on
After 1989, President Bush said, and it's a phrase that I often use myself, that we needed a new world order.
Yeah, and Beijing, Biden agrees.
The affirmative task we have now is to actually create a new world order.
So they're all on board with this, right? If you want to really understand what it's about, they call the ideology that will reign supreme, they call it sustainable development. Just take everything the Bible teaches, flip it 180 degrees upside down, and you just understand perfectly where they're going to fall on every issue all the time, right? God ordained private property rights. He said, thou shalt not steal. And they teach our kids that private property is at the root of social injustice. We need to confiscate everything and we'll redistribute it in the name of equity, and then everybody will be happy. God created marriage. God created family. So what do they teach our kids? Oh, nuclear families are terrible. Marriage could be whatever we want. It could be 2 worms, 2 guys, 3 guys, 4 guys, and a cat, whatever it is. Well, as the Supreme Court said, right? Who are you to argue with the Supreme Court? Okay, and that's where they're going. Even simple things that we never would have imagined would even be controversial. You don't have to be a Bible scholar to recognize God created the male and female. What do they teach the kids? That's bigotry. That's hatred. That's what they're teaching our kids right now. I'll show it to you. Okay? Can you imagine? On every issue, all the time, they'll come down on the wrong side. Now, they've outlined these things in their international agreements. How many have heard of Agenda 21? Okay, it's a UN agreement signed by every government on the planet. CNN will tell you it's a conspiracy theory, so just to make sure we're clear that it's not, here's... we saw George Bush earlier. Here
we've signed a climate convention on the importance of economic instruments and free markets. We're included in this mammoth Agenda 21 document and the Rio.
All right. And here, the leader of the Communist Party in Congress.
The Earth Summit Environmental Leadership Act, as this is known, presents us with an opportunity to follow up on the important work of the Earth Summit to develop its blueprint, Agenda 21, for global environmental action. HCON Res 353 outlines a comprehensive national strategy for sustainable development in accordance with the principles of Agenda 21.
Anyways, you get the point, right? You notice the swamp all agrees. We all need Agenda 21, a comprehensive national plan in accordance with the principles. So what is Agenda 21? Well, according to its creators, it is an array of actions intended to be implemented by every person on the planet. Notice there's no exemptions for homeschoolers in Broward County, right? Every person on the planet. And it requires a profound reorientation of all human society, unlike anything the world has ever experienced. Pretty big plans. So how do we get from where we are to there? You guys are the bitter clingers. You remember Obama called you all the bitter clingers because you're clinging to your guns and your Bibles? So they know we're bitter clingers. So what do? Well, you go to chapter 36 of Agenda 21, and they explain to you what you do, okay? Education is critical for sustainable development. It is indispensable for changing people's values, okay? You got to use education to change their attitudes, their beliefs, their behaviors. It's got to include spiritual education, and we'll come back to that. And it's got to be integrated into every single subject. That's what they say, not me. I've actually got the children's edition of Agenda 21 at home. They use it in government schools all over the world, not just in America. It was produced by UNESCO, the UN's education agency. I don't know if you can see there, you've got some deities hanging out on the cloud, and the storks are delivering babies, and the deities look very concerned. And on the next page, you find out why they're so concerned. The earth groans every time it registers another birth. Okay, remember what I said about the Bible? What does God say? Babies are a blessing. Okay, actually, it was one of the first commands, be fruitful and multiply. It wasn't like, optional, or once you get to this number, then you're overpopulated. But that's what they're teaching our kids. That's what they're teaching our kids, okay? I went down to Rio in 2012 for the follow-up to the conference that created Agenda 21, and they had the kids drawing these posters, right? Little brainwashed poor kids. You see Mother Earth is there feeling very sick, but the doctor has diagnosed a problem. You have humans. That's the problem that poor Mother Earth is facing. Now, in 2015, they updated this. I got a new international agreement, again, signed by every government on the planet. It's called Agenda 2030, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And again, you'll notice that children, this is direct from the text, children are critical agents of change. They're going to use these new goals to build a better world. You're all like, yeah, better world. I like a better world. Well, here's what they mean by better world. Go down to goal number 10 as one monstrous example. Turns out national socialism wasn't good enough. Now we need global socialism. Just read the text, right? We got to share the wealth. We got to reduce inequality. Where have we heard these things from before? If you're from Cuba, you know. If you're from Venezuela, you know. If you're from China, you know. If you're from the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, you know. If you're from Vietnam, you know, right? We've seen this movie before, and it ends the same way every time, okay? Shortages, death, concentration camps, and all the rest of it. That's where they're going. They talk about we need to change the way we produce and consume goods. And then you get to goal number 4. How are we going to get there? We're going to brainwash your kids. Okay? All learners, again, no exemptions for homeschoolers in Broward County, all learners need to not just passively submit to the sustainable development, they need to promote it. Okay, that's going to take some real serious brainwashing. I want to show you a video that the UN produced where they emphasize the importance of what they call education, what normal people would call indoctrination, in bringing
We achieve sustainable development that protects our planet and builds a more inclusive, equal, and peaceful world without education. We can't. Sustainable development begins with education. Put global education first.
All right, so the UN says it begins with education. You got to put global education first. We'll come back to that. They're very serious, and they have a lot of practice now fundamentally transforming the values of your children. I'll show you just one example, and I think it'll prove the point. They've been doing this for a very long time. In the early 1990s, if I had told you that we'd be having homosexual marriages, you would have laughed. I mean, you might have called the guys with little white lab coats to take me off for my own safety. Right? That would have been ludicrous. Sodomy was still a crime. Okay, the Supreme Court didn't strike that down until 2001. And yet they were preparing in advance by preparing the children. So in the early 1990s, they produced this video called It's Elementary, talking about gay issues at school. And I'm going to show you a clip from this documentary. This they showed in classrooms, first grade, second grade, third grade, all over America. They were getting the kids ready. Watch.
Homosexual activists believe that elementary school children should be taught that homosexuality is a natural and normal variation of human sexuality. One homosexual teacher steers his kids to the politically correct view of marriage.
Let me tell you quickly the background. Today, the law says that if you're the same sex, 2 men and 2 women, you can't get married. It is against the law. And I thought that it might be kind of fun for us to sort of be pretend judges for a few minutes. What I'm going to give each of you is a sheet that just tells you that some people think that it's wrong for gays to get married, that it's not natural, and that it goes against what a family is. Other people think that the state should not decide these things, that it should just be up to 2 adults to decide what they want to do. What do you think the answer to these questions are? Should gays be allowed to marry? Should they not?
And now 5 minutes worth of peer pressure. Oh, yeah, how mean that we don't let. And notice how they caricaturize the argument, right? If you're a Christian and you believe the Bible, you know marriage is a representation of Christ in the church. It's not just, oh, some people think that, you know. What? Okay, but that's what they taught the children. And then give it a generation or 2, and boom, the pretend judges on the Supreme Court struck down our marriage laws in all 50 states and our constitutions. Even in California, they asked the voters there, hey guys, how about homosexual? No thanks. No. Even in the land of fruits and nuts, they said no. But they had prepared enough of the children to go there. And now we're here. Okay, Drag Queen Story Hour all over America. They march into government schools. That's obviously a man with some demon horns and a dress, so you know where it came from, straight from the pit of hell. And they come in and they read stories like The Worm with the Worm, right? The homosexual books and transgender books. Now they're teaching your kids that the gas that you exhale is a dangerous toxic pollution, and that only the UN and global taxes on this dangerous toxic pollution can save it. And that sounds ridiculous to normal people, but I can assure you it's true. I've been following the UN clown show around the world for the last 12 years, and I've interviewed a lot of their scientists. It's all a hoax. It's all a fraud, but hey, that's what they're selling. So look at how this works. This is what they teach the kids. Some of this is from schools right here in Florida. Listen.
You've heard the reports. The globe's warming. It's our fault, and the consequences will be terrible.
Children are frightened.
I worry. My mom worries. The water might rise and it might flood the whole town.
We won't be able to survive for long.
What are you most worried will happen?
We'll all die.
Are there some people who say this isn't true?
Yes. Yes.
Might they be right?
No.
How do you know they're not right?
Well, because the earth is getting hotter.
Where do you learn this?
Can't you see?
Oh, can't you see? I know it looks like a doomsday clock, but it's actually a public school right here in Florida.
Can't you see?
One of the main components after educating the students of global warming is that they're given a letter for their families to sign, and this is the congressman or woman.
Huh, see how that works? You brainwash them, then you give them a letter for their families to sign for their congressman. Okay, it's a simple process, and they've been doing it for a long time. Now, from a scientific perspective, this is completely ludicrous. Actually, I spoke at a climate conference with Trump's climate advisor, Dr. Will Happer of Princeton University. He said the idea that CO2 is pollution is beyond ludicrous. The Earth is starving for more CO2. He said plants are designed to live in an atmosphere with 4 to 5 times as much CO2 as we have right now in the atmosphere. And yet, from a totalitarian perspective, it's positively brilliant because there's nothing you can do that doesn't involve CO2 emissions. I mean, you literally can't even die without CO2 emissions, right? So if CO2 is pollution, everything you do comes under the control of the authorities. Now, we think that school is to teach kids how to learn to read, write, do math. No, this is Charlotte Iserbit. She's a good friend of mine. She was a senior advisor on education policy for Ronald Reagan. Listen to what she says.
You think the purpose of education is reading, writing, and arithmetic? The purpose of education is to change the thoughts, actions, and feelings of students.
It is. And now I'm going to show you from one of the people who was involved in this. Her name is Shirley McCoon. She was hired by the U.S. government back in the late 80s to create national education standards, long before we had ever heard of Common Core. Here she is speaking to the nation's 50 governors at a summit convened by George New World Order Bush. Listen to what she says.
Fix up these schools and taking care of them, rather than the issue of understanding that what we're into is a total restructuring of the society.
It's a total restructuring of our society. What's the role of the schools? Listen.
The other function of schools, which sounds paradoxical and yet in a sense is really not, is the fact that we have to prepare students not for today's society, but for a society that's 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the road. And so we have to anticipate what the future is, and then move back and figure out what it is we need to do today. That's called anticipatory socialization, or the social change function of school.
Anticipatory socialization? What? The social change function of school? How many parents do you think know that there's a social change function of school? I thought they were going to learn how to do math, right? As we'll see later, they're doing nothing of the sort. In the interest of time, we're going to skip a lot of this because I don't want to keep us here till 9 a.m. Literally, if we lit up all the slides, we'd be here till 9 a.m. But what does the social change function look like? Well, in Minnesota, little boy decided, after being brainwashed for years in a government indoctrination center masquerading as a school, that he was actually a little girl. Mom, can I please have a sex change? No, honey, come on, get on the bus. Don't be silly, right? Well, the equal partner here, the public school, they knew better than that silly old bigoted mom. So they took this child to a medical facility, and I use that term loosely, and provided a gender transition, okay, a sex change. True story. Okay, now the federal lawsuit, she lost. Apparently her parental rights weren't violated. Okay, true story. California, they've got a gender transition plan. I pulled this right off the Department of Education's website. It's a form for the children. Okay, oh, I don't feel like I identify with my gender. So they'll have this transition plan where you can say what kind of gender you are, what kind of hormones you might need. Do your parents approve? What name should we call you? Do your parents know, so that we know not to call you that in front of your parents? On and on and on. Okay, this happened. And I gave this talk not long ago up in Flagler County here in Florida. Very rural, super conservative county here in Florida. And 2 of the 5 school board members for the county were in attendance. And one of them came up to me later and said, that gender transition form is here in Flagler County, too. It's everywhere, folks. It's absolutely everywhere. Now, the National Education Association, largest union in America, 3 million plus members, teamed up with the Human Rights Campaign, the most radical, vicious, homosexual, transgender group in America. They're the ones behind the Equality Act to shut down your church if you won't bow the knee. And listen to what they sent out to all their teachers. Some of the teachers sent me this. This is a newsletter they sent out. Listen to this.
You said it's cool when teachers ask pronouns. That was never a thing when I was like in elementary school or even middle school. Did you find that you had to like ask for that or like even educate your teachers?
Well, when I had a substitute, sometimes I had to.
Only when there was a substitute, they had to educate on pronouns. All the other ones already know, right? That kid's pronouns are Z. True story. And you got to memorize everybody's pronouns, otherwise you're misgendering them. For future reference, my preferred pronouns are Your Royal Highness. So just so we're clear. Now, this is working, guys. It's working really well. Okay. I grew up in 8 countries on 4 continents, and I grew up with every kind of kid you could possibly imagine. Hindus, Buddhists, Shintos, every single kind of thing. Every color, everything. Never in my whole childhood did I meet a boy who didn't understand he was a boy. Never in my whole childhood did I meet a girl who didn't understand she was a girl. And that's probably true for most of you. When I was a kid, the word transgender was not in the dictionary, okay? Yeah, there were some people, guys that like to put on dresses in their closets and stuff when they thought no one was looking. But, the kids, no, okay? Well, today, this study came out of UCLA a couple years ago. 27% of the children in the state of California are now gender nonconforming. So they're boys who don't accept that they're boys or girls who don't accept that they're girls. 27%. At what point do we say, okay, now you guys have done enough? Do we wait till they've got half of our kids or 3/4? You think these kids are going to go start families after they've been pumped full of puberty blockers and testosterones and estrogens and having their genitals mutilated? Of course not. They're sterile, right? That's what's happening, guys, and we need to speak out. And you think, well, in my conservative state, in my conservative county, that's not really a concern. I was in Utah in March of 2020, and I was giving talks on education. I had the opportunity to meet with most of the members of their state school board, and I was given this information. This came out of their state medical prescription database. What they found was there had been, in the last 5 years, a 10,000% increase in the number of children going through these gender transitions, right? Getting them pumped full of hormones, ready for the girls to have their breasts removed, etc. 10,000% increase in 5 years. And all these parents in Utah, well, we're in Utah. We're super conservative. Our legislature is 90% Republican. Well, their kids are still being destroyed, okay? Now, that last final frontier, that last taboo that you never thought they would actually go there, they are going there. They've already gone there. Okay, in 2016, the state of California passed a law, the LGBT history indoctrination law, and as part of this, they required that every child in the state of California get a full dose of LGBT history indoctrination throughout their educational career. And as part of that, I got actually the curriculum they were using in this school district. They start off with Harvey Milk, the child-raping predator who ended up on the San Francisco City Council and then got shot by a Democrat. Apparently that makes him a martyr. And so he launched the LGBT revolution in America. So they start with him and they move their way down. And then they get to ancient Greece, just casually throw out there, oh yeah, men in ancient Greece used to have sexual relations with little boys. It was totally normal. Okay, and so this mom gets a hold of this curriculum and talks to her kid, and I'll show you the clip in a minute. She goes to the assistant superintendent of curriculum and says, what are you teaching my kids about pedophilia for? What's wrong with you people? Listen to what she says.
Answer me why you're teaching pedophilia in school to 9th graders.
Teaching what?
Pedophilia. Pederosity, right here.
Pederosity, as I discussed with you before, twice in my office when you come to view the materials, I've explained to you that this is done because we are talking about historical perspectives of how gender relations and different types of sexual orientations have existed in history. So this is something,
a man and a boy is a sexual orientation.
Something that's occurred in history, and so this is really important for us to include.
Yeah, it's just a sexual orientation. I mean, what's the big deal? Come on, it's important that we teach them this, right? Well, what happens under this line of thinking? I mean, we all know it would be insane to put a pedophile, a child rapist in charge of the Sunday school ministry, right? But they're teaching the kids that it's just a different sexual orientation. It's against the law to discriminate against someone based on their sexual orientation. It was in California at the time. Now, thanks to the pretend judges in California, nationwide, what happens when our kids grow up? You can't discriminate against him just because he likes kids. Come on. Right? That's where this is going, folks. Here's another school in California. You can see up on the whiteboard there, pedophilia as a sexual orientation. Yeah, they're going there faster than you would like to believe. UNESCO, the UN's education agency, and I use that word education very loosely, they put out in 2018 global sex education standards. When the kids are 5, they should know about masturbation. When they're 9, they should be able to make good arguments for why abortion, the murder of babies, must be safe and legal and funded by government. Some of the things that they want to teach your kids are so appalling, I could not even bring them up in a room with anybody, much less you nice people in a church, okay? But that's what they want. They want it all over the world. And it all goes back to this sick, sick individual, Alfred Kinsey. Some of you might have heard of him with a lot of money from the Rockefellers. He was a sex researcher, and the research he did was so disgusting, I can't tell you too much more without a barf bag handy. They were abusing children, raping children, and then they claimed that children are sexual from birth, and that's why we got to start teaching them sex ed from the earliest possible moment we can get their hands on them. That's the so-called research that justifies all this evil. Now, we think our kids are learning reading, writing, and arithmetic. No, they're not. Okay, Common Core, the National Education Standards, they put 2 subject matter experts on the board of this, on the validation committee. Dr. Sandra Stotsky said, I'm not signing off on this. This is terrible. It's going to reduce the critical thinking abilities of children. There's no way. Okay, the only math expert, Dr. James Milgram. I can't sign off on this. Some of it's based on incorrect math. Are you kidding me? Well, they did it anyway. They just took their names off the website. No subject matter experts on the validation committee. The only 2 had to be swept away because they refused to sign off. Okay, the government knows it's making your kids dumb. They did a study, came out a few years ago through CSAIL. They found significant negative effects in the 7 years after Common Core was implemented. So the Common Core people brought you pseudoscience standards, the National Pseudoscience Standards. And get this, in 12 years of so-called science education, your children will never hear the term scientific method if the standards are followed. Why do you think they wouldn't want to teach them about the scientific method? Because maybe they'd know that there aren't infinite genders. Maybe they'd know that the gas of life is not actually a toxic pollution that we should pay a tax on. Maybe they might realize that they're being lied to, right? Okay, they've got fake history in the classroom, up and down, top to bottom, the 1619 Project. Howard Zinn, an actual member of the Communist Party who wrote the fake history book, People's History of the United States. That's the history they're teaching your kids. And then we act surprised when they want to burn down our cities and open up the borders and dismantle our country. It's because they've learned a completely fraudulent version of history. They have no idea the true history of our nation. It's very sad. And you don't have to believe me that the children are getting dumber and dumber, and they're not actually learning the things parents expect them to learn. This is the government's data right here. Every 2 years, they release the National Assessment of Educational Progress. It's a representative sample of students from all across America take these tests. Less than 1/3 of the children are proficient in reading. Okay? Even by the time they're high school seniors. And by proficient, I don't mean like they're good at this. I mean they barely eke over the most dumbed-down standards we've ever had in our history. Less than 1/3. Okay? Less than 1/4 of high school seniors are proficient in math. You're thinking, that's pretty crazy, right? Here's the Deputy Secretary of Education under Trump. Listen to what he says. Oopsies. Gotta go back.
The National Assessment of Educational Progress, the NAEP, which is called America's Report Card, reports that 2/3, get this, 2/3 of American 8th graders are not proficient in any core subject.
Yeah, imagine a plumber where less than 1/3 of his customers actually got their pipes fixed. And then he had the nerve to say, just give me more money, right? We'd put him in jail. That's called fraud. And yet this is what the government school system is doing every day. You don't have to believe me that they're not teaching reading, writing, math, arithmetic, science, history. The government itself will proudly tell you and then demand more money. So what are they doing? Here's a field trip to a mosque. Here's the 5 pillars of Islam in Kansas. They're doing Buddhism in the classroom. They call it mindfulness education. They got yoga, Hinduism. Here's a teacher training program for Black Lives Matter. Listen to this. We're going to do seances, right? We're going to summon ancestor spirits. Listen.
Then I'm going to ask you to hold an ancestor in your head right now. Ancestors watching, I know they're watching. Ancestors watching, I know. Now call out your ancestors into the room. Loud so we can hear you.
Call out your ancestors in the room. Okay, if you've read your Bible, you know they're not actually summoning ancestors. Okay, it's something much, much more nefarious. Here's a document funded by the Department of Education, how to get rid of Christian privilege in the classroom. One way, they say, is to infuse the curriculum with Muslim thought. Okay? In North Carolina, they forced the kids to stand up in front of the classroom and apologize for their Christian privilege. True story. Now they've got all these fancy schmancy data gathering machines. In the interest of time, we'll just focus on the facial expression camera. So they put this in front of the kids, and then they expose the kids to different. I got this all out of a U.S. Department of Education report. So the children are exposed to different stimuli, and then the camera determines what kind of reaction they have based on their facial expression. And what do they do with this data? Well, they go on to tell us in the same report that all this data that's being gathered is processed through algorithms and artificial intelligence, and it will be used to predict their future behavior and their future interests. So, you know, a drag queen walks in with some demon horns, and your kid makes a face. Ugh, what is that? Right? Oh, okay, this one needs an intervention. The intervention's not working. Okay, well, he can't be a teacher or a doctor or a lawyer. You know, put him on the janitor track, or, you know, he could be on welfare, but he definitely can't have a job where he might influence someone. That's where they're going with this, folks. That's where they're going with this. Now, it's gotten even worse under COVID, right? Because everything had to go online. Now they've got all the data they could ever imagine and then some. They're now openly promoting this transhumanism agenda, but in the interest of time, we will skip through it. And I want to talk about values clarification for a minute, because, you know, you think, well, I teach my kids good values at home. This stuff is just going to run right off them like, you know, like water on a duck's back. Well, they have very advanced psychological manipulation techniques to break down that problem. And they used this on me as a child. In fact, they've been using it since the 1960s. And the UN actually says that this should be used all over the world because it undermines a child's belief in right and wrong. Why would you want to do that? Okay, well, so here's how it works. I remember it very well when they did it to me. They said, so you're in a ship, and the ship's sinking. You all pile into a life raft, but 11 of you jumped in, and there's only space for 10. So now you got to figure out who you're going to kill, who you're going to murder, so that everybody else can be saved. It's in the interest of the greater good. And so they tell you you got a doctor, and you got a lawyer, and you got a teacher, and you don't want to throw the teacher overboard because the teacher will fail you. So you got to figure out which one has least value. Which one do we throw over? And of course, you guys all know the correct answer, right? The lawyer, obviously. Just kidding. There's actually a great lawyer here. I'm just messing around. So, I mean, if the kids were thinking outside the box, they'd say, well, we don't have to murder anybody, Mrs. Teacher. I mean, I'll just take turns. I'll swim alongside the raft for an hour until I get tired, and then we'll rotate, and then nobody has to die. But what happens? The kids think, well, you know, Mom and Dad said we shouldn't murder. The pastor said we shouldn't murder. Bible, 10 Commandments said we shouldn't murder. And yet here's a situation that proves that they're all wrong. There is a time and a place for murder because it's for the greater good. And so it completely demolishes their confidence in their parents, their pastor, their Bible, God, and it makes them believe that morality is relative, that it depends on the situation. Now, even before I was born, Reagan put together this very interesting commission, the National Commission on Excellence in Education. They said this educational system threatens our very future as a nation. They said if a foreign power had done it, we would have viewed it as an act of war. I think we should view it as an act of war. And it shows you how far we have fallen. Or if you go back to early America, we were by far the best educated people on the face of this planet. John Adams wrote in a letter to his friend that a native American who can't read or write is as rare as a comet or an earthquake. So you might find one if you look really hard, but it's very rare. Go read the Federalist Papers. These were written for average people. Farmers, shopkeepers, blacksmiths, shoemakers, right? Go find a young person today who can read them. This study came out in 1812 by DuPont de Nemours, Education in the United States of America. He found that not more than 4 in 1,000 young people are unable to write legibly, even neatly. Not more than 4 in 1,000. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine finding 4 in 1,000 today who could write legibly and neatly? And I'll be the first to admit I can't, right? Very, very few can. And the quality of the education we had in the 1700s into the 1800s was astounding compared to the garbage that we have now. Then along came this guy, Robert Owen, a communist even before Karl Marx came along. And he decided that God was wrong. He knew better. We should get rid of private property. We should get rid of the family. And the way to do that was to get all the kids herded into these government-controlled institutions called public schools, which, of course, didn't exist at the time. So he wrote these essays, and obviously it didn't catch on in America. We had a phenomenal education system without help from the government. Thank you very much. But the Prussian dictator really liked him. And so he wrote in his autobiography that the Prussian ambassador took these essays to the Prussian dictator. The Prussian dictator implemented them and was really, really happy with them. Robert Owen actually started a commune. It failed after 2 years because communism is stupid. If you don't believe me, go to Cuba. And so he decided that the real trick was we just needed to get the kids in government schools. So he set up what a whistleblower called a secret society. The whistleblower's name was Orestes Brownson. You see a drawing of him here. And he said that the great object of this was to get rid of Christianity. And so the purpose of this society was to get people elected to the legislature who would support government schooling and to shift public opinion on the issue. So that was their goal. After Prussia set it up, Horace Mann became the first ever Secretary of Education here in America. He served in the state of Massachusetts. We had never had a government Secretary of Education for any state. So he brought this system into Massachusetts. Total disaster. Right away, the quackery came in. After a couple of years in these government brainwash camps, the kids couldn't even read and write anymore. So all of the headmasters of the schools, they got together, they wrote this brilliant essay debunking the quackery that Horace Mann had brought in, the whole word method of teaching reading. I've got the whole story in a book I co-wrote, Crimes of the Educators, with my colleague Sam Blumenfeld. I don't have it with me, but you can order it online. And John Dewey. Really, he's like the founding father of our government school system. If you ask anybody with a 4-year education degree from a university in America, he picked up where Horace Mann left off in this architecture of government schools and weaponized it even further. So instead of going to Prussia, he actually went to the Soviet Union. He loved what the mass-murdering Soviet dictatorship was doing. He praised how they were instilling a collectivistic mentality in the children, and he wanted it to come here to America. So he actually wrote in an essay called The Primary Education Fetish, that this change must come gradually. To force it unduly would compromise its final success by favoring a violent reaction. He knew if parents and teachers understood what was happening, they would be tarred and feathered. Rightfully so, okay? So he got himself a position at Teachers College. He resurrected this whole word quackery that produced so much illiteracy, made it go nationwide. Now we've got evidence proving it does actual brain damage. I mean, you can see the physical damage it does to the brains of children, and you're probably not surprised to know at this point that it's mandatory under Common Core. In kindergarten, they have the kids memorizing whole words. True story. Even though we've known since the 1840s that kids can't learn to read properly that way. You suppose there's an agenda here? Okay, Dewey was also a very religious man, not in the sense that normal people would understand, but he and a couple dozen others got together and wrote the Humanist Manifesto. First tenet, religious humanists regard the universe as self-existing and not created. What does the Bible say? In the beginning, God created. Say right off the bat, we disagree. Okay, even if you're not a Bible-believing Christian, and I think you should be, this has very important political implications. Our founding fathers didn't think you had to be a Bible scholar to understand that God created us. They said it was a self-evident truth that God created us and that he gave us rights. But if you believe John Dewey's religion, you can't have God-given rights. There's no God. What do you mean? Don't be silly. Okay. Now, in 1962, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled we couldn't have prayer anymore. In 1963, no more Bibles. And they said the First Amendment requires this, right? Congress shall make no law. I didn't know the state of New York or my school district was Congress, okay? But Justice Potter Stewart, one of the dissenting justices, he wrote in his dissent that what was happening here was not actually the realization of a state of neutrality. Rather, this was the establishment of the religion of secularism. The Supreme Court literally did what Congress was prohibited from doing. They established a national religion. Dewey would have called it humanism. If you read Genesis 3:5, you know this religion's been around for a very long time, right? Man can be his own little God, and we just have to figure out for ourselves what's right and wrong. We've heard that all before, haven't we? Now they're going to a global system of indoctrination. The UNESCO is helping to lead the way. They've been on this mission for a very long time. Incidentally, the first head of UNESCO, Julian Huxley, was also the head of the British Humanist Association. And another fun fact, he was the head of the British Eugenics Society, these racist lunatics who think that you need to breed humans properly so we can improve the gene pool. Okay, true story. It's all a true story. The first head of the Global Education Agency. Now, they've got international agreements mandating global education. In 1990, they said all children need to learn from the same standards. In 2000, they got together and they said education must change the attitudes, values, and beliefs of the children. Here's the head of the UN in 2015 talking about what schools should be doing.
Education must do more than produce individuals who can read, write, and count. It must nurture global citizens who can rise to the challenges of the 21st century.
Quick show of hands, how many sent their kids to school so they become good global citizens? Still no, okay, nobody ever does, right? Now they've got in 2016 another education agreement. It must shape the spirituality of the children, and we'll talk about that. Here's another video of UNESCO bragging about where they're going with this.
The Education 2030 Agenda is our roadmap to inclusive and quality education for all. UNESCO, the UN specialized agency for education, is leading the global and regional coordination of this ambitious goal, responding to cutting-edge global challenges, supporting countries to build better education systems, and monitoring progress to make sure the world stays on course.
Monitoring progress, make sure the world stays on course. And in that British accent, I mean, how could you disagree, right? It sounds so smart. Cutting-edge global problem. What what the heck is a cutting-edge global problem? But anyways, think about what she said, right? But certainly they're not going to monitor our progress, right? We're America. Oh, yeah. Here's Arnie Duncan, Secretary of Education. He gave a speech at UNESCO. He said, you guys are my global partner in changing education around the world. We're going to turn the kids into green global citizens. True story. We're going to infuse sustainability into every element of the curriculum. He quoted a communist terrorist. He said, education is the most powerful weapon you can use to change the world. He's right, okay? Now, they also have a World Core curriculum. It was written by this guy here, Robert Mueller, Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations, wackadoodle of the highest order. He believed the United Nations was the body of Christ. I kid you not. Okay, and in this World Core curriculum, he actually wrote a teacher's manual for it. And if you get a copy, they probably have it at your local library. Go read the foreword. He says that it's based on the teachings of Alice Bailey and this Tibetan teacher, Jval Kuhl. And since most Americans don't know who that is, it'd be easy to read right past it. So who is Alice Bailey? I'll give you a clue. The founder of the Lucifer Publishing Company. Okay, they've renamed it now. It's called the Lucius Trust because Lucifer Publishing was just a little too obvious. And this Tibetan teacher, turns out he's not Tibetan, he's not a teacher, and he's not even a human being. Like Shirley McCoon that we met earlier, the social change function of schools, Alice Bailey claimed to be in communication with ascended masters, these spiritual entities that were telling her what to write in books like Education and the New Age. So if the World Core curriculum is based on her ramblings, we should know what she had to say. Here's a clue. Education in the New Age. She said world citizenship should be the goal of the enlightened with a world federation, world government, and a world brain. Our challenge was to fuse Marxism and neo-scholasticism, but to do it using the freely chosen cooperative methods advocated by, drumroll please, John Dewey, okay, who we met earlier. Okay, they're very serious, guys. Now, what does Common Core have to do with this? Well, in 2004, Billy Gates of Hell went over to UNESCO headquarters and signed an agreement with them on behalf of his company, Microsoft. They agreed they were going to create a global syllabus, global curriculum, global teacher training programs, and global technology standards for education around the world. Then he came home and he started funding Common Core. In fact, he put $2.3 billion into Common Core just a few years after signing this agreement. Well, rather than tell you myself, I'm going to let you see a video from the Common Core people talking about what Common Core really is. Listen.
Up until now, it's been pretty hard to tell how well kids are competing in school and how well they're going to do when they get out of school. Is a girl in your neighborhood being taught as much as her friend over in the next one? Is a graduating senior in, say, St. Louis as prepared to get a job as the graduate in Shanghai? Well, it turns out the answer to both of these questions is no.
Shanghai.
Because for years, states have been setting different standards for what students should know and be able to do at each grade level. What we really need are clear goals. That's where the Common Core state standards come in. The standards are consistent from school to school, and they match up against international standards too.
They match up against
now
international
we know how
standards.
we're doing compared to just about
Seattle,
everyone.
Chicago,
so
Shanghai,
even though
and
local
Paris.
communities will still design their own curriculum with the same rules, everybody can compete on the same kind of staircase.
All right, match up against international standards. So that's the bad news. Everything I just showed you is a documented fact. I brought the receipts so you could see it yourself. You can get all these documents yourself. Now I'm going to give you just a couple minutes of my opinion, which you can throw right in the garbage. And then I'm going to give you a couple of minutes of God's opinion, which you can't. And then we'll be done. So we need to ask some fundamental questions. Can we reform this monstrosity that is destroying our children? No, exactly. Thank you, sir. We cannot, right? I wish we could, but it was designed to do exactly what it's doing. It's like you take your perfectly running car to the mechanic and say, fix it, and he's going to be, what do you mean fix it? It's doing what it was supposed to do. It's turning your kids into godless socialists. That was the goal, dumbed down godless socialists, right? So as I see it, we either get the kids out as quickly as we possibly can, or we get ready for this crazy future that we saw the three presidents talking about earlier. We need a Dunkirk operation, right? The British troops were on the beaches of Dunkirk, totally surrounded by Adolf Hitler's National Socialists, about to be annihilated. That's our kids there, right there, guys, on the beach, totally surrounded, about to be destroyed. And if they're destroyed, we will not live to fight another day. Well, the British wouldn't take that lion down. They prayed. They got everything that would float. It went across the English Channel. They picked up as many boys as they could. They brought them back to the British Isles. And not only did they live to fight another day, I can proudly report they're not speaking German today in the British Isles. So good news, right? So we can do it. We live in one of the wealthiest societies that has ever existed in human history. There's plenty of resources to get our kids out, but we have to deal with this with the urgency it deserves, okay? Treat the school building like it's on fire. If your kids are inside and the building is burning, what do? First, you start a petition. Then you run for school board. Then you lobby your state. No, right? You run inside, you get the kids, and you run out the other door. And then you wake the town so that everybody else gets their kids out too. That's what we need to do. We need pastors, priests, rabbis to sound the alarm. Again, I mentioned incredible news. Kids are flying out of there. When I first started telling people to get their kids out, I was like, that's fringe. That's radical. Well, President Trump said we need to protect our kids from the failing government schools. Rush Limbaugh 3 times before he died said, get your kids out of the government schools. Franklin Graham, one of the biggest evangelical leaders in America, get your kids out of the government schools. So the tide is turning, folks. What does God say about education? Proverbs 22:6, he says, Caesar should raise the child in the way that he should go. And then you guys are looking at me funny because that's not what it says. Caesar should not be raising your children. Parents should be raising the children, okay? Parents should be teaching the kids when they wake up, when they lie down, when they're eating, when they're walking by the way. There's no time for Caesar to do anything there, okay? Proverbs 9:10, we know the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Proverbs 1:7, we know the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. You guys know just as well as I do, you can't even mention the Lord in school. They'd rather have head lice or, bomb threats. No God, no Bible. So you think they're going to get any knowledge or wisdom in there? Don't be silly. Of course they're not, right? Absolutely not. What happens when you don't have knowledge or wisdom? My people are destroyed. Hosea 4:6, okay? Martin Luther said schools that didn't teach the scriptures diligently would become great gates of hell. For the Catholics out there, Pope Pius XI, any education that doesn't have Christ at the center of it is false and full of error, okay? The purpose of education, according to Harvard, which, believe it or not, was a good school at one time, the main end of the child's education is to know God. Okay, that's the purpose. John Milton said the same thing. So we are born in a self-governing republic. That means we have a dual purpose. Our kids need to know the things they need to know to be able to govern themselves. Homeschooling, if you can do it, is amazing. I think it's the gold standard. I think it's what God describes in the scriptures. If not, you can delegate some of that authority to a Christian school, to a tutor, whatever you need, a co-op, but you got to get them out, folks. You have got to get them out. The data shows homeschoolers are running circles around the victims of government schools in the 80th to 90th percentile on the government's own tests at like 5% of the cost, with a whole lot more fun, a whole lot less tears. All these men here were primarily educated at home. And they created the greatest, freest country in the history of the world that has done more for mankind than any other nation in the world. And they did it all without a full-blown formal education, much less a government education. So get your kids out, folks. There are great private schools out there. You can learn about Freedom Project Academy over here. I am a teacher there. I've been working with them for a long time. Great options. There are also some really bad options, so parents, do your due diligence. Don't send your kid to a $20,000 government light education, right? Don't do it. We've got some resources. I don't have them here with me, but we do have resources. She mentioned that we started Public School Exit. Sam Sorbo, who will speak in just a moment, is on our advisory board. So are many other top lawyers, experts, educators. The former superintendent of public instruction for the state of Arizona is on our board. That's the quality of people that we have brought. We want to help every single parent in America get their kids out. There's no excuse to have a child in a government school today. The UN wants to shut down our freedom. They want to get all the kids into government schools. They want to regulate the private schools. These law professors at Harvard and William and Mary want to shut it down too. Here they are indoctrinating. Here they are dumbing down. And at least we got our guns, right? They'll never take our freedom as long as we have our guns. Guess what, folks? I'm a gun guy too. Don't worry. They'll get my gun for my cold, dead fingers. But guess what, guys? Your guns will be absolutely useless if they get your kids. And they've got your kids. What are you going to do with your guns when your kids show up at your doorstep and demand that you hand them over? The answer is, of course, nothing. So our founders put their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor on the line so that we could be free. The least you can do is get your kids out of the brainwash camps so that our children and our grandchildren can have a chance at a proper future. And I want to leave you with a scripture, because I don't want anybody to think this is just like an educational battle or even just like a political battle. It's not. The Bible explains clearly what we're facing. Ephesians 6:12, it's a spiritual battle. It says we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities, spiritual forces of darkness and wickedness in high places. That's what we're up against, folks. It's a demonic assault on our children. If we don't protect them, nobody else is going to do it for us. That's all I have. Thank you, guys, and God bless you.
I think we may have a few minutes for questions. We can take 2 questions if anybody. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Please, one more round of applause for Alex Newman. And to that point, people ask me, you know, why am I so passionate about the work that we do? And it's because, you know, higher education, people talk about that a lot, and it's a huge issue as well. But K through 12 is so important because these are minors. They don't know what's happening to them. They have no clue that, you know, when they're being taught that they don't know what their gender is or whatever, they don't know that they're being manipulated. And so it's so important that we inform parents and get involved with this. So in the past year, Florida Citizens Alliance, we've had a lot of parents looking for alternatives. So we created a website called libertyscholar.org, where we have information on homeschooling, how to homeschool for parents. We have all of the Florida scholarships on there. We have videos on the Constitution, and we also partnered up with a few organizations. So we've partnered with Classical Conversations. So parents, through us, we're marketing their materials. They have a great homeschool program. We're also marketing Freedom Project Academy, which Alex Newman works for. They're an online virtual classical Christian school with live teachers, and it's just a really great alternative for parents as well. And then we also promote Bill Federer's books. He's one of the top historians who's still alive and writing today. So we have all of those materials over on this table afterwards if you'd like to buy any of Bill Federer's books or take a look at Classical Conversations or Freedom Project Academy. We've got some information over there. One of the organizations that I mentioned, Freedom Project Academy, we've got a video just to show you a little bit about them.
Are you looking for a maskless alternative to your child's current school? I'm Dr. Duke, the director of Freedom Project Academy, and I am very proud, our whole organization is very proud, to be a Liberty Scholar for the Florida Citizens Alliance. Freedom Project Academy offers a first-class classical education with Judeo-Christian values right from your home, where all you have to do is make sure your kids are on the computer and turning their assignments in. We do all the work, all the grading, all the assignments, and you'll have the peace of mind knowing that your kids are safe. We are very proud to be aligned with Liberty Scholar and the Florida Citizens Alliance.
Dr. Duke Pesta is amazing. He runs the whole initiative and just a very, very intelligent man. So I encourage you to check that out and let parents know about that alternative. Today, we couldn't have her in person, but Carrie McDonald is a senior education fellow at FEE. We're going to play a video of her speaking. She's the author of Unschooled, Raising Curious, Well-Educated Children Outside the Conventional Classroom. She's also an adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute and a regular Forbes contributor. Carrie's research interests include homeschooling and alternatives to school, self-directed learning, education entrepreneurship, parental empowerment, school choice, and family-child policy. Her articles have appeared in the Wall Street Journal, Newsweek, NPR, Education Next, Reason Magazine, the list goes on and on. She lives in Cambridge, Massachusetts with her husband and 4 children. Here is Carrie McDonald.
Thank you to the Florida Citizens Alliance for inviting me to present my thoughts on what has been a whirlwind year in terms of education. My name is Carrie McDonald. I'm a senior education fellow at the Foundation for Economic Education, adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute, a frequent Forbes contributor, and the author most recently of the book Unschooled, raising curious, well-educated children outside the conventional classroom that was first published in the spring of 2019, but not surprisingly gained renewed interest in the spring of 2020 as approximately 50 million US K-12 students suddenly found themselves displaced from classroom learning in the wake of the school shutdown. In these schools, as a result of Zoom schooling and really seeing the classroom experience up close, and many parents began to say, gee, I've always been intrigued about homeschooling, or I've thought about different education experiences for my children, but I lacked that catalyst to make it happen. And the pandemic response really, I think, was the trigger that enabled them to make some choices and to select some different learning models. And that's what we started to see. Gallup came out with a poll in August of last year, finding that, suggesting that 10% of students in the US would be homeschooled. That would have been a doubling from Gallup's previous year poll, showing 5% of homeschoolers. And 2 months later, Education Week came out with a similar poll, finding 9% homeschoolers for this academic year. And both of those polls would suggest that the rate of independent homeschooling would have more than doubled since the start of the pandemic response last spring. So prior to the pandemic response, pre-pandemic, the U.S. had just under 2 million homeschoolers, K-12, and now it's close to 5 million. So more than doubling of independent homeschoolers, of families pulling their children out of a district school or out of a private school and choosing to direct their education themselves. And I think along with this came a real sense for parents that they were back in the driver's seat of their children's education, that they felt, again, more empowered to take a closer look at what their kids were learning. They began to really search for alternatives. They became more interested in models such as homeschooling or higher quality online learning, often through private, low-cost providers that were much better quality, much more engaging and effective than the district's Zoom schooling, or they investigated other local private school options. And I think that that's going to continue to 2021 and perhaps beyond, particularly as in many cases teachers unions continue to be slow to allow schools to reopen in many areas. You see that even in areas, especially in large urban areas where schools may be reopening, it's still sort of hybrid models with kids only attending in person a couple of days a week. In many cases, older students not attending in person at all. And so there's still quite a bit of uncertainty for this coming fall. And I think that this will continue to urge parents to take matters into their own hands to make sure their children are getting the highest quality education experience that they can get. And along with this, we are seeing increasing support for school choice policies. So Real Clear Opinion Research last fall released survey data finding a 10% increase in support for school choice policies, such as education savings accounts, tax credit scholarship programs, and vouchers, compared to the spring. So up to 77% of respondents in this particular survey saying that they have a more favorable view of school choice policies, that they would support school choice policies. Other survey data suggesting the same thing. And currently, more than 24 U.S. states have active legislation to propose or expand school choice policies. And this is a great sign. I think a lot of parents who may never, again, have really thought much about school choice, maybe never thought it really applied to them, again, are much more supportive of programs that enable funding to follow students instead of funding systems or schools that in many cases are not fully reopened. So that's another positive sign that I think is going to continue to stay with us even post-pandemic. I'll also say another bright spot to what was otherwise a difficult year has been the growth in education entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurs realizing parents' demand for education alternatives, their demand for high quality private online learning resources, or pandemic pods and microschool networks that have emerged. And I think that this may unleash really a new age of new innovative, enterprising education models that will be great for parents and students and educators alike. So as much as it's been a disruptive year and difficult for many families, I think that the fact that parents are now back in charge of their children's education, that there's more support for school choice policies, and that there's a renewed sense of education entrepreneurship and innovation in learning models, I think that those are some bright spots that can keep us going as we remain in these final days of this pandemic response. Thank you so much for having me.
I think she's she's really interesting. Her articles are amazing. If you check out Carrie McDonald at FEE, that's Foundation for Economic Education, she's constantly writing about what she calls unschooling, which is, homeschooling, but really that kind of experience-based, letting the kid really explore. And they're such curious little creatures, and they, if you let them learn, they will. And I'm so excited to have Sam Sorbo here today and to talk to us a little bit about homeschooling, because at some point, once they learn reading, writing, some math, it's self-taught. Kids want to teach themselves. They want to kind of speed ahead as fast as they can once they understand those things. So today we have the pleasure of having Sam Sorbo here with us. She is a truly remarkable woman. Sam Sorbo is the author of They're Your Kids, an inspirational journey from self-doubter to homeschool advocate, filmmaker, screenwriter of Let There Be Light, talk radio show on Talk America Radio, and international model. She is fluent in 5 languages and studied biomedical engineering at Duke University before pursuing her career in modeling. In 2015, Sam won Best Supporting Actress from the Utah Film Awards for her role in Just Let Go. Sam is married to Kevin Sorbo, actor and writer in the movie God Is Not Dead, Part 1 and 2, among many other films. They have 3 children whom Sam homeschools using Classical Conversations, one of our Liberty Scholar partners. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Sam Sorbo.
Thank you so much for that lovely warm welcome. I feel terribly inadequate to this task coming after Alex, because his presentation is so phenomenal. And yet, I'm going to try something a little new for me tonight, because I am still in a process of growth. And I think that speaks to what we think about education. And so I'm going to try to expand your minds a little bit tonight, and hopefully I'll be successful. First of all, Edgerton is a professor of engineering at MIT, and he said this: the trick to education is to teach people in such a way that they don't realize that they're learning until it's too late. But when I was a little girl, I read a book. It was called The Castle Number 9. Does anybody here know that book? It was Bemelman's. Bemelman's wrote the series on Madeline. Remember the little girl with the hat? And this book predated that. And what happens at the Castle Number 9 is there's a butler who goes to work at this castle, and the gentleman, the lord of the castle, he decides that the language is kind of weird. Like, why do we call candles candles? That's silly. And so he looked at a candle and he said, it looks like a drop from the sun, so I'm going to call it sun drops. And he trained his butler to call the candle sun drops. And the dog was always happy to see him, both in the front, with the ha, 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 right? And in the tail, the waggy tail. And he said, we will call the dog Happy on both ends. And he renamed a couple of other things, and they took it upon themselves to have basically their own language, like stairs were known as leg lifters. Okay, fast forward, and what happens but Happy on both ends ran up the leg lifters and knocked over the sun drops. And the butler ran to the pompier, to the fire brigade, and told them that story, and they said, huh? And so he had to explain to them, oh, well, we renamed everything, and so Happy on both ends is the dog, and so the story is the dog ran up the stairs and knocked over a candle, and the whole castle is on fire, and by that time, the whole castle had burned down. And they learned a very dear lesson. Don't mess with words. But that's what they're doing to us today. That is what the evil opponents of God are doing to us today. In fact, in the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God. And the Word was God. And in fact, God spoke in Genesis. He merely spoke, and he created the entire universe. So words have power, and the enemies of God have recognized that, and so they are very busy trying to steal the power of the word and fighting against the word. In fact, words are spirit. They're spiritual thing. They are our thoughts, are they not? And yet, the enemies of God are very busy trying to change the meanings of our words out from under us. Did you know that they redefined the word bigot in the Oxford Dictionary last year? So now, if you prefer chicken to fish, you're a bigot. Now, why would they do that? To muddy everything. So now we have to call a man a woman, right? In the Bible, it says, for the word of God is living and active, sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing to the division of soul and of spirit, of joints and of marrow, discerning the thoughts and intentions of the heart. And discerning the thoughts and intentions of the heart. And yet they are trying to take our words away from us. This is their final effort, I believe, in perverting the language, because our language is our ability to think. They've changed the meaning of scientific method. They're taking it out of the schools. They're not even teaching it. Have you noticed there are no studies to prove anything that they're claiming about COVID? There are no studies. Actually, I'm going to correct you. There is a study. It's up on my website at samsorbo.com. It was done about 10 years ago. It concludes that there is absolutely a 0.02% efficacy in reducing the transmission of viruses using a cloth mask. They studied 4 different kinds of cloth, and there is 0.02% efficacy. That's up on the CDC website, if you can still find it. But it's 10 years old, so it's no longer politically correct. So they don't, and of course we just saw Fauci's emails from last January, February, saying he didn't believe in masks at all because they're not effective. Because the studies proved they were not effective, but we're no longer interested in proof, we're no longer interested in truth. They aren't. They're redefining the word hate, right? They've redefined the word fascism. If you look up fascism, it is a form of right-wing politics. It is not. Fascism is left-wing. It is decidedly left-wing. It has everything in common with communism. They have the same artwork. They have the same color scheme. They have the same methodology, bullying, intimidation, and violence. And yet they believe that Trump is a fascist. They won't say that Hitler was a fascist, though he was. They won't say that he was a socialist, though he was. In fact, I wanted to say they have fascism in the schools now, because you can still have your children, but they will tell you how to educate your children. That's fascism. Political correctness is fascism of language. You can say anything that you want as long as we get to dictate what it is. That's fascism. So fascism is just like communism, except that in communism, the government owns everything. In fascism, you can own it, but the government still controls it and tells you what you can do with it. That's basically the same thing. So they're busy telling us that killing the unborn, otherwise euphemistically referred to as abortion, is perfectly okay. They're telling us that self-mutilation is also self-love, right? And I don't know if you know this, but proficient is defined, seriously, by the school system. Proficient is defined as able to answer 38% of the questions correctly. 38%. So when they're using language that you think you understand, please recognize it's a different language. They have changed it. And they are not above lying. In fact, they love the lie. They live in the lie. And that's why I have to show you. I wrote my book, that's why I wrote my book. My book starts dedicated to the word, because it's words for warriors, not rules for radicals. Rules for radicals was dedicated to the devil. And that's the difference. And so as Christians, we have to understand, we are fighting powers and principalities. We are fighting against people Look, the greatest trick the devil ever played, I'm sure you've heard this one. Greatest trick the devil ever played was to convince the world that he didn't exist, right? The greatest trick the atheists ever played was to convince us that they don't believe in God. They do. They do believe in God. They believe they are God. And guess what, folks? They're a jealous God, and that's why you can't go to church. Think about it. That's why they shut down the churches, because they are a jealous God. And so that brings me to the word education. Do we all think that we know what education is? Can you define education? Do you know what it should be? I would put to you that you don't. Why? Because we all grew up in the public schools. And by the way, even if you went to a private school, the private school was fully informed by public school, because the private school had to compete with public schools. And so if you were going to make a choice to not go to the public school, you better have exactly what the public school's offering, but better, which actually kind of almost means worse in a sense. And by the way, how do we fund our schools? Oh, we collect money from everybody, and then we funnel it to the few. That's socialism. So when you send your children into a socialist system, why would you think they would come out as anything but little socialists? The entire system is informed by that. And that's why I love Alex's message of you can't save them. Even though part of my message is run for school board, because there are too many people out there who are like, no, I just, you can't save them because they're tainted from the outset, sadly. And it brings me no joy to bring this message, right? I mean, I wrote my book about homeschooling, and it's kind of ridiculous because I came to homeschooling, my second grader went through second grade, and he was very underserved in the public school. I never thought I'd be home educating. I never thought that I was capable, which is funny, right? Because you read my CV a little bit. You would think that I'd be like, of course she thinks she can educate her children, right? Duke University, come on. No, seriously. In fact, when my children were little, I speak fluent French, but I didn't know how to teach them. And so I was at the park one day, and I was talking with a French gal in French, and we were conversing, and I said, hey, in French, do you think you could tutor my kids French? Because I'd really love for them to learn it. And she literally, she thought I was joking. She's like, say what? I said, my kids, I really want them to learn French. Could I hire you to tutor them? Because you seem really nice, and maybe you could just come over and just tutor them, every week or something. And she looked at me, she said, we're speaking French. You speak French. So bear with me here. We don't know what education is, because education used to be, and this is what I believe is the biblical definition of education. It is the teaching the discernment in the pursuit of truth, beauty, and goodness. What is truth, beauty, and goodness? It is God. God sets the standard of truth, he sets the standard of beauty, and he sets the standard of goodness, right? And so education ought to be simply engaging the child in the discernment of truth, beauty, and goodness. Now, what are we teaching in school? 180 degrees opposite of that. We are teaching, in fact, a friend of mine marched down to his school, which was connected. It's the school that's associated with the National Cathedral. And he said, how dare you teach my 11th grader these things? What about objective truth? And she said, the superintendent or whatever they have there, she said, we don't teach objective truth. They teach the opposite of truth, that truth is subjective. That's the opposite of truth. In fact, it's so funny because, they're constantly telling us that we have to be more tolerant, right? What's the least tolerant thing you can think of? Think hard now. What's the least tolerant thing that we have? I'll tell you. It's the truth. The truth doesn't care about your feelings. The truth is the truth, and it is immutable, right? 2 + 2 is 4. You can call it 5 or 7 or 18, but you'll be wrong because the truth is the truth. And so every time that they scream for tolerance, you know what? They're lying. Because if they wanted to acknowledge the truth, you'd say, well, it's the truth. You don't have to point it out. It's obvious. The truth is right there. But they're constantly screaming for tolerance because they lie, and they love the lie, and they love teaching the lies. In fact, growing up, I hated Dr. Seuss. I'm one of those weird kids. I didn't understand it. It was a bunch of mumbo jumbo, and I thought it was ridiculous. Dr. Seuss, The Cat in the Hat. Yes, I eat green eggs with ham, or, you know. Guess where Dr. Seuss came from? Anybody? Do you know this? Whole word reading. So they decided to implement whole word reading without testing it, and actually I learned tonight, that had been tested. They knew that it was damaging, but they thought that they would just implement it again. And by the way, I'm sure that there are plenty of people involved who are just bamboozled and don't know what the heck they're doing. You know, they're just going along because they trust the person who's telling them stuff. But they said, okay, we need whole word reading. Why? Why did they change phonics to whole word reading back in the 50s, 60s, somewhere in there? Right? Why? Anybody? Come on. No. There's an even better reason. That was an ancillary, good effect in a sense. They needed to sell more books. Do you know they have to burn the books in, I think it's the state of Texas, they burn them every 5 years because they need to sell more books. Science doesn't change, but you got to sell more science textbooks. Reading doesn't change, so you change the entire curriculum as a way of selling more books. So they said, okay, we'll do whole word reading. Well, we need new books. Who are we going to get to write the books? And they went to this guy, Dr. Seuss, and they gave him a list of all the sight words. And he said, I can't do anything with this unless I make them rhyme. Okay, I'll just make them rhyme. And so we ended up with a bunch of really idiotic books that I can't believe Ted Cruz actually decided to read into the congressional record. I mean, pathetic. Anyway. So they teach white privilege. What's white privilege? There is no such thing. It's actually green privilege. They teach critical race theory. What is that? Racism. Thank you. Right? They call it one thing. That's a lie. Everything they do is a lie. And when you start to wrap your head around that, it may be, I'm hoping, it'll draw you out of the whole paradigm because you have to rethink the way you think about education. Keep me honest on my time. Give me a 5-minute or something. Okay. 1619 Project, what does that teach? It teaches the children that the United States is intrinsically racist, which, by the way, there's no cure for that because it's systemic, right? Have you heard that word? Systemically racist. That means that it's in the system. So what's the solution? We have to completely undo the system. We have to tear down the entire system and start over again. Wouldn't that be lovely for the globalists? Tear down the best country in the world because it's successful and they can't take power as easily, right? And so, and by the way, completely anti-biblical because what does the Bible teach us? Number one, there is forgiveness, right? Under 1619 Project, no forgiveness. By the way, what is cancel culture? I like to call it cancer culture. But the teaching of unforgiveness. And by the way, what is unforgiveness? Who does it burden? Does it burden the aggrieved? No, it burdens the person who needs forgiveness. And you can't escape because there's no forgiveness. In their world, there's no forgiveness. It's the opposite. They live in opposite worlds. Okay. They're teaching pornography and human trafficking. We saw that. They are grooming your children in school. There's no reason why a second grader's lexicon should include the word lubrication. I'm sorry. It's just no. Except for a car. Okay, fine. Don't get too technical. They teach that your carnal urges are more important than your character. Can you imagine? This is child abuse. That's what it is. It's child abuse. And by the way, it's all funded by the unions. The unions are behind all of this. And that's the second reason why we can't fix it. We have to go after the unions. I don't know if you know this, if you run for school board, then you go for a training session on how to be a good school board member. Guess who runs those meetings? The unions. And what is your job? Agree with everything the superintendent wants to do. Just rubber stamp it, and then you're a good board member, and that's what they teach you. And by the way, if you went to public school, you are ripe for indoctrination that way. Because what do? We follow rules, do we not? Because what did we learn in school? Sit still, stay quiet, follow the rules, follow the teacher. And what do you have to do before you ask a question? Look at it. You don't even, you all did it. No, I'm not making fun of you. I'm trying to prove a point. It's ingrained in you. What does this mean? What does it mean? Thank you for the humor. I know, I should get more humor in my talks. What does it mean when we raise our hand? What does that mean? What are we doing? We're asking permission to speak. Nobody asked any questions when Fauci took the stage. Nobody asked any questions. Why is a scientist making economic decisions? Let's start there. Why slow the spread? How about speed the spread? I don't know. Maybe speed the spread would be better than slow the spread. Did anybody consider that? Right? Just a few fundamental questions. But no, you've all been taught to sit quietly until you're called on. And you better hope you're not called on. Because why? What's the other lesson that we learn in school? Don't be wrong. But if you talk to Michael Jordan, if you talk to any very successful businessman, and you say, how did you achieve such great success? Their answers typically are, I failed a lot. That's like the generalized answer. I failed a lot. But we're taught to fear failure. We're taught not to try rather than make mistakes. We're taught so much in school that is anti-us, anti-God, anti the purpose for being. And then, of course, we have no teaching of civics in our schools anymore. Why? Think about this. Our civics are that our government is instituted of the people, by the people, and for the people, right? Wherein the power resides with the people. Why would a government want to teach the citizens that? There's no reason to. They want the power. So it's a self-fulfilling kind of a prophecy on their part. It's a tremendous conflict of interest to have our government. Now, in China, there's no conflict of interest because they rule with an iron fist, and you go to the schools, you get indoctrinated, and you serve like a good little servant. But here, it's a tremendous conflict of interest. We really ought to be not, and I know there are a lot of people working towards having the funds follow the child. That's a recipe for disaster. I think that it's a step, but I just think it's like a lateral move. And I think that we really have to reevaluate the way we look at education overall. So, first of all, if you go to school and they just give it to you for free, do you value it? No. So kids don't value education because they're being force-fed it, and they never asked for it in the first place. The second thing is, it makes education no fun at all. Children are born naturally creative. That's what unschooling is. And I used to be like, unschooling? Horrors, that sounds terrible. No, we need to teach our kids academics. I am now moving away from that. Not that I don't like academics. I do classical conversations. I'm an academic. But I have a child who's not an academic. And boy, is she giving me a run for my money. But she's an amazing artist. Like crazy. Like poetry. Brings tears to my eyes. The stuff that she comes up with out of her little head and draws on paper. And that's a gift. And I pray to God, like, what am I supposed to do with that? I'm a mathematician. It makes no sense to me. And God says, you're just supposed to guide it. Teach her truth, beauty, and goodness. Let her find her own path because God has imbued her. Right? But we're so distrustful. Why? Because we went to public school. And I just want to try to get you guys out of that. So first question parents ask me now, what about curriculum? Curriculum, schmurriculum. I don't know how to say it curriculum is doing what the schools do, only perhaps a little bit better, but that's not the metric. The schools shouldn't be your metric. Checking off boxes and feeding children enough that they can just regurgitate it on a test is sentencing them to drudgery for the rest of their lives. So it's not about curriculum. Yes, go look for some good curriculum. Who cares? That's fine. Do some of that. But no, what you want to do is release the natural curiosity of your child, help guide that, and help them discover the greatness that they have inside. Not push a bunch of greatness down their throats and hope that they end up as Einstein. Right? I mean, that's what it is. It's flipped on its head. We've all been taught wrong. It pains me to say this, and I feel like I'm telling fish inside the aquarium what it's like to breathe air. But come on out, because you can breathe air, you mud skippers. The parents aren't invested in school because why? It's free. The whole paradigm is fraught with frailty. It's meant to fail. It's meant to underserve the children. And then finally, I have parents say, well, my children are salt and light. How dare you? They're just children. You want your children to fight your battles for you? I had a parent say to me the other day, because there was a mom, and her Christian school is fully woke, and they hired a black pastor. And their headmaster was like, we just hired a black pastor, solidarity or whatever. She said, why would you use the adjective black? Like, that shouldn't matter to us, right? And then the black pastor taught the kids all about critical race theory and stuff. And so one of the moms marched down there, and she said, how dare you teach my biracial daughter that her white mother is oppressing her? And then she said this, if anybody's oppressed her, it's her black father who walked out when she was 2 years old. Mic drop. They don't care. And that's a Christian school, sadly. I don't know. What do we do with that? So you can't sacrifice your children on the altar of convenience, the altar of conformity, the altar of convenience. I don't know why anybody would consign their children. We are worse than 27th in the world now. We spend more money per capita, per student, than every nation except Switzerland, and we're 27th in the world on the assessment tests, which you know what I think about those anyway. But if that's your metric, it's still not good enough. I think maybe the most powerful thing I can say is that parents don't know what they sacrifice when they send their children away from them for 8 hours a day. That's the sacrifice. People say to me, oh, you sacrifice so much to home educate your children. I say, no, absolutely not. I refuse to sacrifice and send them to public school or private school for that matter. I believe children are a gift from God. And what do we do with a gift? Well, we hand it to someone else to open. Here, open this for me. Tell me what's inside. Tell me how good it is. Is it a good gift? That's what we do when we send our children to school. You tell me how my child's doing. I mean, look, I was there. I did it for the first 2 years. And I realized that, and I literally said to Kevin, I said, I think I want to home educate next year. And he's like, what? Why not? Let's try there's a Christian school. I said, I can't remember, $20,000 a year. He said, well, we could try home education for a little while. I'm so mean. Don't tell him I said that. I said, you know what? I feel like even if I fail our son, he'll be better off. And that's the message today. Even if you fail your children, as an educator, they will be better off, because your job as a home educator is not to be a teacher. Don't be a teacher. Do not teach your children. Do not try to replicate what they do in public school. Don't stand in front of a blackboard. Don't put your child at a desk. In fact, I'm rebranding home education. I'm rebranding it self-taught, self-teaching. My children are self-taught. They're autodidactic. Does anybody know the meaning of that word? No, we've all forgot. Like, we were never taught. Autodidact is self-taught. Who's laughing? Jerry. Jerry? Yeah. I can't see very far, but I'm pretty sure that's you. Support a change in the culture. We need more people speaking out for the culture. I say to people, run for office. Sorry, I've got something in my throat. Oh, is one of these? Sorry. Oh, I just breathed something in. Okay. How much time do I have? 2 minutes. Great. Okay. If you're interested, I brought a few of my books. They're your kids. An Inspirational Journey from Self-Doubter. That's me. To Homeschool Advocate. That's also me. I didn't think I could do it, but I thought I could fail better than the school was failing. No, seriously. It's that simple. I could do better at failing than they were, or not as bad failing as they did, or something. I also brought Teach from Love. I believe that we need to model and discuss virtues with our children. That is the role of the parent more than anything. We want to raise virtuous children. Why? Because virtue makes us happy. That's not the only reason. But, right? We want our children to prosper. And if they are not virtuous, they won't prosper. I also brought, because I want to offer it as a free gift, if you buy a book, you get a free DVD. This is a documentary, a pro-life documentary that I just finished with a partner, and I'm very proud of it. And so I'm giving them away because I want people to see it. Okay, share these ideas with people. Talk to them. We need to be having this conversation. Do not shy away from having the conversation. The next time the left wants to silence you, just tell them that they're lying. Just say that's a lie. You know, people, I don't wear a mask. I feel very blessed to be in this great state. And people say, you should wear a mask. And I say, no, I shouldn't. It's like, nope, that's your religion. That's not my religion. Because I did the research. It's that simple. If they lie, say that word doesn't mean what you think it means. That word that you're using, whatever it is. I just wrote down, I took a note. I take notes on all your stuff, but this note, 27% of California children are gender nonconforming. The gender movement is a denial of God. Let's be very clear. This entire movement is a denial of the supremacy of God and Jesus Christ the Savior. And we need to be cognizant of that, or we won't be able to push back. But if we know that, then we can stand in truth, because 2 Timothy 1:7, God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. And so we are entrusted with the truth, and we are called to spread the truth. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sam. Every time I hear her speak, I'm just so encouraged, and I cannot wait to have kids of my own so I can homeschool them. It sounds so fun. So everyone has a folder on your chair, and inside the folder is this little postcard. So I want to tell you a little bit about the Hope Scholarship before I play the next video. The Hope Scholarship, first of all, raise your hand if you know somebody who has a child in the public school system, right? Everybody. So this is their ticket out You've heard all of this information on why we should get our kids out. This is one option. Florida Citizens Alliance this past year, we've really been pushing homeschooling, but we also recognize that not everybody will homeschool their children. And so this is a way to pull them out of the public schools and put them into a private school of your choice. So a little bit about the Hope Scholarship. It's available in Florida. It's basically our best kept secret. What it means is if a child in the public schools is being threatened, intimidated, or harassed, bullied in any sense, but really what they did is they added those 3 words when they passed this bill through. So threatened, intimidated, or harassed by anybody in the school or at a school-sponsored event. So this includes the teacher, an administrator, the bus driver. It could be another student as well. If they feel, again, bullied, threatened, intimidated, or harassed by anybody on school property or a school-sponsored event, they are immediately eligible for the Hope Scholarship, which is up to $8,000 per year to send your child to a private school of your choice. And the most powerful part of this scholarship is that the power is in the hands of the parent. The parent actually determines their own eligibility. All they have to do is believe that their child has been hurt in some way, and they print out a notification form. We have the QR code right on here. They print that out. It's just 1 page, super easy to fill out, and the principal is legally bound to sign that. And then they're eligible for every single year. So if it happens in 1st grade, it follows them. Now, what does threat, intimidation, and harassment mean? This is where we have to open our minds, because bullying, typically we would think student on student. And this was primarily to fight bullying, the Hope Scholarship. Well, now bullying, under this new definition, can be a teacher teaching critical race theory, or the 1619 Project, or let's say your child's mask falls off and the teacher screams at them for that. That's intimidating. That's harassment. So there's so many opportunities to use this scholarship. I was a public school student, and I frequently say I believe that every single student in the public schools is eligible for this every single day. So please, please take this home with you, share it with somebody. We have a bunch of copies in the back as well. Give them to your pastors, give them to your churches, and spread the word. So now I'd like to play a video from Nicole McCloy. She was a mom who sent in this video. It's very powerful, telling her story with the Hope Scholarship. It can be a little bit hard sometimes because, of course, the principal doesn't want to just hand you over the money and say goodbye. The schools want to keep their funding, so it's really, it's been a battle, but Florida Citizens Alliance has been very willing to escalate those situations. So here is, yes? No, there is no deadline. It's all year round. There are some changes with a few of the other scholarships in Florida. They were trying to bundle in the Hope Scholarship with the Family Empowerment Scholarship, and we said, no, we've been promoting this as this Hope Scholarship. We need parents to know that this is still consistent. But basically, at any point, parents are eligible, so we're really trying to get them to take that notification form to their principal and get enrolled for next year.
Hey there, my name is Nicole McCloy, and my husband Brian and I picked up our family, our 3 children, and our 2 dogs, and we moved to Manatee County back in August of 2020 during the pandemic because we were living in the state of Colorado, and it became very evident to us pretty early on that we held very different values than the people surrounding us. And so we decided we needed to get back to the East Coast, and we came to Florida for the freedom that you were all experiencing here, for a governor that we find amazing, and we just decided it was time. So we didn't really look at schools. We didn't really consider what we were moving to. We found a house. Across the street was a great, what we were told was a great elementary school, and down the street was a great high school, and so we just moved here expecting to send our kids to public school. We'd always attended public school in Colorado for as long as we can remember. Our oldest is 14, and our kids have always attended public school, either public school or a charter school, because in Colorado we had something called school choice, so you could choice your kids into any school you wanted, and we always just ended up getting in where we wanted to have our kids. I had never been to a school board meeting in my life because I didn't need to. We happened to attend church with many of the school board members at our last school, and so we knew that the things our kids were learning in school were things that we could stand by, that we agreed with, and we just never had any problems. We learned very quickly after moving to Manatee County that things were very, very different here in the school system, in the public schools and the government schools. And it didn't take long before our kids just were not having a good time. Our oldest was really not thriving. She started having tummy issues and not wanting to go to school the next day. Our middle two kiddos who were in elementary school were just didn't like it. They didn't like school. They had always loved school. My kids get up early. They're excited to go to school. They're all really great students. Teachers are always raving about how friendly and helpful they are and how kind they are, and they've always loved school. So this was a really strange thing for us. So I started attending some school board meetings because I thought, this is crazy. The reason I started attending the school board meetings was because our kids were being forced to mask up, and I thought that was really, really strange to live in a county where there was no mask mandate at all. There was no mask mandate, but yet the kids were having to mask up. And I couldn't figure out how this school board that was supposedly conservative, many of them, was requiring our children to mask up. It didn't make sense to me. So I started attending school board meetings, and I realized the school board didn't work for the parents or for the constituents, the people that voted them into their seats. The school board works for the government. They do whatever the government wants. They do whatever the government entities want. And so quickly I said to myself, this is not going well. They are not ever going to side with parents on anything unless it serves them as well. Strange thing, but here we are in a red city, a red county, in a red state with a very blue school board. So eventually it got bad enough with my high schooler that I pulled her from school. I also pulled my second grader because he had some things happen at school that weren't so wonderful. My fifth grader stuck it out. She was the one, if anything, being made fun of and being called names and just having, kids be horrible to her, but she's the one who actually wanted to stay in school. She didn't want to come and be homeschooled. It didn't take us long to learn homeschooling was not for us. My kids love going to school. They love hanging out with their friends. They love spending time with their teachers. They love learning in that environment. And so it broke my heart because not only was I trying to run my business from home, but also I have kids at home that are just sad. They were sad kids. They didn't want to be there. They wanted to be in school. They wanted to have what they used to have back before this whole pandemic thing started and masks were going on. And so we ended up finding out about a school that was a private school, and it was really close to our house. It was a private Christian school. But oh my word, the cost of the school, it was going to be like $30,000 a year to send all three of our kids there. And we just prayed about it, and we're like, I don't think this can happen. Like, it's just out of our ballpark in terms of what we could afford. We didn't want to take out a loan to send our kids to school, basically is what it came down to. And then we learned about the Hope Scholarship. And so it was key. It was instrumental in being able to, utilize a scholarship and be able to send our kids to a school where they could thrive. And so I didn't think we'd qualify because our income was too high for most scholarships that I had heard about. But because the Hope Scholarship does have a lot of caveats and a lot of ways it can be used, it doesn't have to just be traditional bullying that you think of. When you think of bullying, you think of, a swirly in the toilet or somebody beating up your kid or, being really harsh to them. It pretty much can be used for lots of things. And so if you have a kid, if you have a child who you want to move out of a public school, you need to reach out to Florida Citizens Alliance because we did, and it changed everything for us. All of our children, all three of our kids, started at the private Christian school down the street from our house in January this year. And they were able to do that because we had so much help and support from Florida Citizens Alliance. And, it wasn't even hard. The process wasn't hard. It was actually really, really easy. When we first started looking at it, I thought, gosh, it's intimidating to have to reach out to a principal and get a letter signed when you don't really have something documented. You don't have, bullying documented. You don't have a kid being mean to your kid documented because that stuff happens every day, all the time. But it really was simple. It was so easy. It was one form that you fill out and you give to the principal to sign. They have to sign it. They can't say no. They literally have to sign it. It can be a substantiated thing or an unsubstantiated thing, meaning they can investigate all they want. Doesn't matter what they find. Your kid will qualify for that scholarship. Also, remember, it doesn't have to be the kind of bullying you're thinking of in your head. There's so many loopholes. So if you want your kid out of the public school system, reach out to Florida Citizens Alliance. My kids are thriving today. They love to go to school. They have amazing friends. They're happy, and we are so grateful.
We want more of these stories. We want more families to take advantage of the Hope Scholarship. I want to share a little bit about Florida Citizens Alliance quickly, and then hand things over to Karen Gushta to close us out for the evening. I told you we would end on time, so I'm going to flash through this, but I wanted to tell you a little bit more about Florida Citizens Alliance. Everything that you learned today is the reason why Keith Flaw and Pastor Rick Stevens started Florida Citizens Alliance, because they realized that our republic is in serious danger, and it's because of our K through 12 education system. So our mission is to improve Florida's K through 12 education by uniting and empowering parents, teachers, and community influencers, students. And really kind of the underlying tone is to get rid of the indoctrination in our schools. We are fighting critical race theory right now very aggressively. We are fighting the 1619 Project. We are fighting the pornography that's being taught in our schools, the sexually explicit material in all of your packets. I also gave you a copy of what we call our pornographic materials report. What we did was parents were coming to us saying, look at this sexually explicit material that our public taxpayer money is paying. We're paying for this, right? But it's being put into our public schools where children, underage children, can get a hold of these books. So we documented them. We sent out public records requests. Not many counties actually return those, but you can see the whole study that we did there. We are currently working on reviewing, basically, or renewing that report with the help of Pacific Justice Institute. I'd like to give a shout out to Alex Bumbu, who is helping us with that. So yes, they're amazing. This time, when we send out the public records request asking these school districts, do you have these harmful materials? We're going to have their letterhead on there so that there's a little bit more pressure there to be backed by Pacific Justice Institute. So we're really glad about that. Okay, so we work in 3 pillars. The first one is legislative action. We just finished the legislative cycle. There were some good things that happened there. The parental rights, basically anything that has to do with children, we are interested in. So any bills that are going through on our website, we either support them, oppose them, strongly support, strongly oppose it. We send out action alerts in a way that our base, 110,000 active supporters, they can immediately, with one click of a button, they can send each of their committee members a message instantaneously and have them either support or oppose a bill that has to do with child education, pro-life issues, anything that has to do with children. So I encourage you to go to our website, goflca.com, and sign up for our newsletter so that you can receive those action alerts in the future. We also work with uniting parents and community leaders through what we're doing today. So this kind of event, Keith and I speak all over the state constantly. We're doing at least 2 events, maybe a week, speaking. So we're really trying to educate people. And then lastly, providing alternatives. So as I mentioned, last year we created the website libertyscholar.org, which I encourage you to check out. Again, libertyscholar.org. We've got the information on the scholarships and how to homeschool and all that kind of stuff. Again, I talked about the Hope Scholarship. This is obviously the event that we're at today. We did an event back in April 17th, and we're looking for more community leaders to step up and help us organize more events around the state. And we'll also be starting webinars, monthly webinars in the near future. So Keith Flaw, my boss, consistently says that our public schools are government-run, union-driven monopolies. So if you agree with this, how do you reform a monopoly? And he would say, you can't smash it. You have to break it. And in order, how do you break it? And basically introducing alternatives. So that's why we back school choice, parental choice, parental rights, getting the parents' voice back in, homeschooling, alternatives to public school. That is what we focus on because we believe that we have to break that monopoly. Over 50% of our Florida kids cannot do math or read at grade level or proficiency, which right is 38%. I also included in your folders a page just showing you how you're doing in Broward County. Let me pull that up. So in Broward County, based on the U.S. News and World Report, they take national data looking at the SAT, ACT scores. 55% of your students can read proficiently. And 49% of students can do math proficiently. And remember, yeah, proficiently just means 39%, so that's pretty alarming. But then when you look at the other side of the chart here, we look at how does the Florida Department of Education rank Broward County schools? Well, what's interesting, so you're a B school district. How so? So you're failing, but the Department of Education says that you're a B. Well, a few years ago, they changed the grading curve. It's based on 8 different factors, reading, writing, arithmetic, and all that kind of stuff. And in Florida, a 62% or better is an A. Yeah, so if your county's doing 62% or better, you're an A school district. That's Collier County. We're just at that 62%, and our superintendent goes around saying, we're an A school, look at us, we're doing great. So you're a B school. The difference between a C and a D is 39 and 40%. So we are really failing our students. Again, get them out. There's rampant indoctrination, the 1619 Project, critical race theory. We are fighting critical race theory. If you go onto our website, the very first thing you'll see is a petition to the governor and the commissioner of education, Richard Corcoran, to basically sign an executive order to stop the adoption of textbooks in Florida. Florida Citizens Alliance played a huge role in getting rid of Common Core. It is gone, but now we're grandfathering in new standards. The new standards, the Department of Education went to the big textbook publishers. This year, we are adopting English language arts books. And they said, look, here's what we want. But they forgot to tell them what we don't want. We don't want critical race theory. We don't want the 1619 Project. So, of course, Pearson, McGraw-Hill, all these big textbook publishers who do not work for us, they work for the system. Of course, they put all of that stuff in the textbooks which are currently being adopted. If they get adopted into Florida schools, they'll be stuck there for another 4 to 6 years. Again, more indoctrination. So what we're doing is asking people to sign that petition to get his attention. We already have Governor DeSantis' attention, but we're really trying to push that pressure. This is the civil rights issue of our day. Who does this affect more? This affects the minorities. This affects so many students around the country. Florida students deserve better. And when we talk to our legislators about this, they typically say, oh my gosh, I can't believe what you're showing me. I mean, they're also shocked by this, but then they say, well, thank goodness my kid's in private school, right? That's not an acceptable answer. So this is so important, the work that Florida Citizens Alliance does. So 3 action items: sign up for our newsletter, goflca.com. You should have it on the folder. Follow us on social media. We're constantly shadow banned, so the more that you share our information, the better, the more we can get it out there. And inform your church. Like I said, Keith and I, we go around and we speak. I've got my own presentation kind of exposing the system. And so we are absolutely interested in coming to your church, talking to the parents who have the kids. So please invite us. We will make the drive so that we can educate people. If you have a phone handy, here's a QR code for our social media. And now I'm going to have Karen Gushta come up here. She helped us put this whole thing together. She's one of our most amazing local leaders. Here's Karen Gushta.
Thank you, Dominique. Thank you. So I say let's give our speakers and presenters and everybody who came a big hand. We appreciate so much all the work that goes into this, and we appreciate your passion and your understanding of the issues. I was a teacher educator. I was a part of the system For about 12 years, I taught in elementary school, and then I moved into teacher education. I taught philosophy of education. I taught John Dewey. I was realizing, however, when I started to look at what was being taught and compared to what I thought would be taught at a Christian college that was in teacher education, I found out it was strange. They were teaching the same kind of developmental psychology classes that I had been teaching in the public education system. There was no difference. They were teaching the same ideas about education and what education should be for children. Missing is the whole idea of calling, getting and opening up our children to their calling, purpose, and destiny. That's what I heard. That's what resonated with what you were sharing, Sam. Because that's really what we want. We want our children to recognize and appreciate their God-given talents and gifts, and then we want to nurture them in that. Everything that we do as home educators, as educators, that should be the goal of every school system, is to develop that talent, that ability, that gift that they have. And unfortunately, one of the statistics that I like to quote is simply the Phi Delta Kappa survey. Every year they do a survey of parents and have parents grade their schools. Back in 2009, I wrote a book, The War on Children, How Pop Culture and Public Schools Are Putting Our Kids at Risk. And at that time, the Phi Delta Kappa survey said, parents were saying, 61% of them said, I would grade my child's school an A or a B. Do you know that in 2019, their survey, 76% of parents are now grading their child's school as an A or a B school. Parents do not know. I call it my child's school is fine syndrome. And that's what we have to do. We have to wake up. We have to wake up as as citizens. I do not have children, but I'm concerned about the coming generation. We have always heard is it Lincoln that said, we're just one generation away from apostasy. So it's up to us. Those of you who are here tonight, you've got friends, we have other relatives and so forth. We need to do everything we can to wake up the parents, wake us all up so that we can get engaged and involved. And as Dominique said, there's a number of ways that you can get involved with Florida Citizens. And so thank you. I want to thank you all for coming here tonight. And I trust that we have all been prompted by what we've heard tonight to take greater action. Thank you again for coming.